بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Can somebody remind me which section in the fiqh part did we reach? Okay, page 100. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We completed prayer inside the Kaaba. Did we complete the prayer inside the Kaaba? Okay, Bismillah. So making up missed prayers, qada, maintaining correct order, tartib between a missed prayer and a current prescribed prayer, as well as between missed prayers themselves, is necessary, mustahaq. So what that means is, for example, if somebody missed, for example, Dhuhr prayer for some reason, and then Asr time came in, they must pray their Dhuhr prayer first and then pray their Asr. If somebody actually prays their Asr first, then their Asr will stay suspended until they pray their Dhuhr and then repeat their Asr again. If they don't do that and the time of Asr lapses, then their prayer is fine. But they should try to keep the order of the prayers so that a person continues to stay as Sahibut Tartib, a person who is following the order of his prayers or her prayers throughout his or her lifetime. However, this order is no longer mandatory in one of three situations. Number one, if the recommended time of the current prescribed prayer is about to expire, in which case one prays the current prescribed prayer before making up the missed prayer. So for example, somebody's missed their Dhuhr and it's Asr time, but Asr time is also about to expire and they only have enough time to actually pray Asr. Should they pray their Dhuhr first and then their Asr? No, they should pray the Asr first because there's not enough time left for Asr itself, and then later on make up their Dhuhr. Number two, forgetfulness. Somebody totally forgot that they had missed their Dhuhr and they prayed their Asr, that's fine. And number three, if the number of missed prescribed prayers, excluding witr, becomes 6 or more. So if somebody has missed 6 or more prayers throughout their lifetime, then they are no longer Sahibut Tartib. Then they lose this quality of being a person who has all of their prayers up to date. Therefore, if they later miss a prayer and then the next prayer time comes, they don't have to pray the previous prayer first and then make the next one. So for example, somebody misses Dhuhr for some reason, but that person has already got like a few months of prayers missed or a few years of prayers missed, and then Asr time comes in. Do they have to make up their Dhuhr first and then pray the Asr? No, they can go straight to their Asr because they've got more than 6 prayers that they have already missed throughout their life. Hence, that which one prays of current prescribed prayers, even witr, is invalid yet suspended. What that means is, if somebody prays, has missed Dhuhr and then prays Asr at Asr time, but there's enough time for them to pray their Dhuhr as qada and then repeat their asr, then they must do so. It is not necessary in the intention of making up a missed prayer to specify the exact prayer. Rather, it is sufficient to intend a Zuhr or an Isha that one owes. This ruling also applies to fasting. So somebody wants to make up their previous prayers, they don't have to specify, I missed a Fajr on Monday, the 5th of July, 2020. No, all they say is, I'm making up the last Fajr that I missed or the first Fajr that I missed. So to specify the prayer itself is important, but you don't. The specification of the time and the day is not necessary. And also with the fast, one who did not immigrate to Muslim lands after his conversion to Islam is excused from the obligation of making up missed prayers or fasts due to his ignorance of the sacred law, Sharia. This doesn't apply in our times now, because by and large, people who accept Islam in non-Muslim lands also have enough access to Islamic knowledge of knowing about the 5 prayers and fasts, etc. Whereas previously, when Muslims didn't travel out to non-Muslim lands so frequently, they would only go for business and then return back home. They wouldn't take up residency. Then if a non-Muslim accepts Islam in the lands of the non-Muslims, he may not know that there are 5 prayers in the day and there are fasts of Ramadan, etc. So once he immigrates to the lands of Islam and then he finds out, then he should start his prayers from then. He doesn't have to make up the previous years of prayers or fasts. Catching the congregational prayer. Prayer in congregation surpasses its performance alone by 25 degrees in terms of merit. In some ahadith, it mentions 27 degrees, 25 or 27 degrees more reward, greater than praying the prayer individually alone. Thus, if the congregation commences after one had already begun the obligatory prayer alone, he should break it with 1 salam while standing and then join the congregation, as long as he had not yet performed the first prostration for a 4 rak'ah prayer, or even if he had performed the first prostration for prayers that do not have 4 rak'ahs, i.e. Fajr and Maghrib. So if somebody goes into a masjid and they start to pray the Zuhr prayer, and whilst they upon starting their Zuhr prayer individually alone, the Iqamah happens and they realize that the main congregational prayer of the masjid has not yet occurred. What should they do? He should break it with 1 salam while standing and then join the congregation. So Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then go and join the congregation, as long as he had not yet performed the first prostration for a 4 rak'ah prayer. So if he had performed the first prostration of a 4 rak'ah prayer, then he should continue that prayer and make the prayer into 2 rak'at, which will then change into nafil, and then go and join the congregation. So if it's Dhuhr, Asr or Isha, so the prayers with 4 rak'at, somebody has made the first sajda of the first rak'ah and they've heard the Iqamah being said, then they must pray the second rak'ah also, and then in the first sitting after at-tahiyyat, give the 2 salams, and those 2 rak'at will become nafil, and then go and join the congregation. Whereas if in Fajr or Maghrib, a person starts their prayer and they hear the Iqamah, even if they have made the first sajda of the first rak'ah, they can still break out and go and join the congregational prayer. For those prayers specifically, i.e. the 4 rak'ah prayers, if he had already performed the first prostration, he should add a second rak'ah such that it becomes a 2 rak'ah voluntary prayer, and then join the congregation intending the obligatory prayer. So that's what we've just explained. If he had completed 3 of the 4 rak'ahs, he should finish the prayer, i.e. all 4 rak'ahs. So as long as the person has prayed 2 rak'at of the 4 rak'ah prayer, he can sit in the first sitting and give salam and join the congregation. But if he goes up for the 3rd rak'ah, then he should not break that prayer, but rather continue the 4 rak'ah, and that will be his fard prayer. If he had completed the 3 rak'ahs or 4 rak'ahs, he should finish the prayer, all 4 rak'ahs, and then join the congregation with the intention of performing a voluntary prayer except for Asr. So, except for Asr and for Fajr. So if somebody walks into the masjid at Zuhr time and they've prayed the 3 rak'at of Zuhr individually, then they should finish their Zuhr. And then if they have time and they want to join on with the Imam, they can pray Nafal behind the Imam. This is for Zuhr and Isha. Regarding the 4 rak'ah of regarding the 4 rak'ahs of Sunnah before the Friday prayer or before Zuhr, one should break the prayer after only 2 rak'ahs. So if somebody is praying their 4 sunnahs of Zuhr or Jum'ah, and then the Iqamah happens, what should they do? Once they have prayed the first 2 rak'ahs, then they should give salam. If they are on the 3rd rak'ah, then they should continue and complete their sunnah prayers. If one enters the mosque and finds the Imam already performing the obligatory prayer in congregation, he should not pray any sunnahs, except for the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, as long as he feels reasonably sure that he will not miss the congregation upon finishing the sunnah. So what does that mean? Somebody walks into the masjid and the jama'ah is standing. One should not pray the sunnah prayers, but rather should go and join the jama'ah. Except in Fajr, if somebody walks into the masjid and they've just heard the Imam say Allahu Akbar for the beginning of the prayer, then they should try to quickly pray their sunnah prayers and join on to the obligatory prayer of the Imam. Whereas if the Imam is sitting in the final sitting and in at-tahiyyat, obviously the person will not be able to pray 2 rak'at of sunnah and then still join the Imam. So in that case, the person should directly go and join the prayer, the fard prayer of the Imam. The sunnah prayer before Zuhr is made up within its time, within its prayer time before its 2 rak'ah sunnahs. So here, if somebody misses the 4 sunnahs of Zuhr, which are sunnah mu'akkadas, they enter into the masjid and the Imams began the obligatory prayer, one should join the obligatory prayer. As for the 4 sunnahs that one missed before, then the scholars have a difference of opinion. Some scholars said they should be made up immediately after the fard before the 2 sunnahs, and some scholars said they can be made up after the 2 sunnahs, which are after the fard prayer. So either before the 2 sunnahs or after the 2 sunnahs. There's a difference of opinion. The merit of praying in congregation is attained by catching even the final tashahhud with the congregation, yet by doing so one is not considered praying in congregation. So what does that mean? So there's 2 things here. If somebody joins the Imam in the final sitting, inshallah that person will have the reward of praying in congregation, i.e. 25 or 27 merits, whereas that person will not be considered that he prayed in congregation. What does that mean? Yet by doing so one is not considered praying in congregation. That is with regard to oaths, vows and the like. Okay, so what does that mean? If for example somebody took a vow or an oath or a qasam and said, by Allah, I am going to pray Zuhr prayer in jama'ah in this particular masjid, and then they reach the jama'ah in the final sitting, the scholars have said that person will have the reward of praying in congregation, yet that person's oath and vow will not be fulfilled because they wouldn't have caught most of the prayer itself. They would have only caught a tiny portion at the end. One may pray voluntary prayers before any obligatory prayer as long as he feels reasonably sure that he will not miss performing the obligatory prayer in its time. So Zuhr time has started, somebody wants to pray Nawafil, that's fine. As long as one is sure that they won't miss the fard itself, they can pray as many Nawafil as possible as they wish. If one prays the obligatory prayer by himself, after which its congregation begins, it is not disliked to leave the mosque. except for Dhuhr and Isha, in which case he should pray with the congregation intending 4 rak'ahs of voluntary prayer. So somebody's prayed their Dhuhr prayer and their Isha prayer, and then the congregational prayer begins. The scholars have said if that person has time, then that person should pray with the Imam, but voluntary prayer, nafil prayers. In our time, sometimes people are on their lunch break. They go to the local masjid and there's still 5 minutes left for Jama'ah. They pray the obligatory prayers and they leave so that they can get back to work as soon as possible. In previous times, if somebody was to leave out of the masjid whilst the congregational prayer had stood, then there were times of fitna whereby that person might have been abandoning the imam and the congregation of the area to show his opposition against the imam or the local people. So this is why the scholar said it's makruh to walk out without praying with the imam. If one prays the obligatory prayer by him, okay. It is disliked for one to leave a mosque in which the adhan has been performed before praying with its congregation, except for a valid excuse. Again, a valid excuse can be somebody has to get back to work, somebody's going to another masjid, they've got an important appointment to reach, etc. An obligatory prayer is not repeated after its performance. So in the Hanafi school, once you've prayed your fard prayer, that's it, it's done. You can't repeat it again. If one joins the congregation while the imam is in the bowing position, says the tahrima, then remains standing until the imam raises his head, he did not catch that rak'ah of the prayer. So somebody walks into the masjid and the imam is in the ruku position. This person who comes to the masjid then says Allahu Akbar to initiate his prayer. But before he could reach the imam in the ruku position, the imam said Sami Allahu liman hamida. If the imam comes out of the ruku position, then the newcomer has missed an entire rak'ah. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Man adraka ruku'a faqad adraka rak'ah. The one who catches the ruku' has indeed caught the rak'ah, but the one who misses the ruku' would have to make up the entire rak'ah afterwards. If a follower bows before his imam, yet after the imam had recited the minimum obligatory amount by which a rak'ah is valid, and the imam then catches him, i.e. the follower in the bowing, the follower's bowing is valid, otherwise it is not. So the imam is still standing reciting and somebody from behind him in the congregation goes into the ruku position. Now, if that person stays in the ruku position for such a period of time whereby the imam has actually also come into the ruku position, then his ruku is valid. But if that person goes into the ruku position and before the imam reaches him in the ruku position, he says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, then that person's ruku is not valid. Then he would have to repeat the ruku again after the imam has performed his ruku, because any integral of the prayer in which the muqtadi, the one behind the imam, precedes the imam and then doesn't repeat it after the imam has done it, then that person's prayer will be rendered invalid unless they make up that integral of the prayer after the imam has done it. And the prostration of forgetfulness, sujudus sahw. Does anybody have any questions on the previous section? Okay. The prostration of forgetfulness, sujudus sahw. It is mandatory wajib to perform 2 prostrations along with an extra tashahhud and 2 salams for the omission of one or more mandatory wajib requisites of the prayer due to inattentiveness or forgetfulness. So In one of the previous sections, the Sheikh mentioned all of the wajib acts of prayer. If any one of those wajib acts is forgetfully missed or is delayed from its place, then it becomes wajib, mandatory, for a person to make the two sajdas of forgetfulness at the end. How are they made? So the person sits in the final sitting, reads at-tahiyyatu lillahi was-salawatu wat-tayyibatu up to abduhu wa rasuluh. Once one says up to abduhu wa rasuluh, says assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, one salam to the right side, and then makes two sajdas. Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la 3 times, Allahu Akbar, sits up, then Allahu Akbar back into sajda, and then sits back in the at-tahiyyat position and recites the entire at-tahiyyat from beginning right to the end, and then gives 2 salams. This is the way of performing the sajda of forgetfulness. It is sunnah to perform the prostration of forgetfulness after the first salam. Thus, if one does so before the salam, it is mildly disliked. Makruh tanzihi. So if somebody recites up to abduhu wa rasuluhu, and then instead of giving 1 salam says Allahu Akbar and goes into sajda and makes the 2 sajdas, that person's 2 sajdas will be valid, but the person would have done something which is makruh tanzihan, mildly disliked in the prayer. One becomes absolved of performing the forgetfulness prostration if a time in which prayers are disliked enters, such as the changing of the sun after Asr, or if the time expires such that the prayer is broken, such as sunrise for Fajr. So somebody is praying their Asr really late, right before sunset. So Maghrib time is close. And then they make a mistake, forget one of the wajibs or delay one of the wajibs, then they shouldn't make the sajda of forgetfulness. Also in Fajr, if somebody is praying Fajr like literally 1 minute before sunrise, and whilst they are praying their Fajr, the sun rises before they have made the first prostration of the first rak'ah, then their prayer is invalid. Then of course in that invalid prayer they will not make the sajda of forgetfulness. If one begins to rise, okay. If one thinks he has finished a 4 rak'ah prayer, says the closing salam, stands up, and then realizes he had actually been in the first sitting having prayed only 2 rak'ahs, he should complete it and then perform the prostration of forgetfulness. If someone else joins his prayer, it is valid. So somebody is praying a 4 rak'ah prayer. After 2 rak'at, the person gives salam. We're reciting in the fiqh book on page 107. So somebody is praying a 4 rak'ah prayer, and they've prayed 2 rak'at and they forget, and they think that they are in the last sitting, and they recite the whole at-tahiyyat and give both of their salams. Then, whilst they are sitting facing towards the qibla, they haven't spoken to anyone. If they make some dhikr, recite Ayatul Kursi, make dua in Arabic, that's fine. So long as the person is facing towards the qibla and doesn't talk to anybody, it doesn't say anything worldly, it stays in a state of dhikr, and then the person remembers, oh, I've still got 2 rak'at left, that person can immediately then stand up and continue with his or her prayer, and then at the end of the prayer make the 2 prostrations of forgetfulness. If someone else joins his prayer, it is valid. What does that mean? If a male is praying alone, and somebody knows that this person is praying their fard of Zuhr, and that person walks up to the person who's already praying, taps them on their shoulder, and then stands beside them and joins onto that person's prayer, that's valid. You might say, but if that person didn't make an intention of being an imam, good question. The answer to that is, a person does not have to make an intention of being an imam for another male to join onto his prayer, a person would only need to specify that he is being the imam if he knows that there are women behind him or women will come and join him in his prayer. If one begins to rise for the third rak'ah in the 3 or 4 rak'ah prayer and then realizes he had not performed the first sitting, he should return to the sitting position. So somebody's praying 4 rak'at, he's prayed 2 rak'at, and instead of sitting, he stands for the third rak'ah, right? And then he realizes, as he is rising, he realizes that he has not yet sat for the first at-tahiyyat, then he should return and recite the first at-tahiyyat. The same ruling applies to the final sitting, i.e. he returns to it if omitted, as long as he had not prostrated. So what does that mean? Somebody's prayed 4 rak'at and they didn't sit after the 4th rak'ah because they thought this is my third, and then they stood for a 5th rak'ah. So long as they do not make the sajda of the 5th rak'ah and they remember, they should return back to a tahiyyat position and then at the end make the 2 sajdas of forgetfulness. However, if the person makes the sajda of the 5th rak'ah, then they should add on a 6th rak'ah and all will become nafil prayers, and then the person would repeat their prayer all over again. The same ruling applies to the final sitting. Okay. If, however, he performs the prostration of the extra rak'ah in this latter case, so he's praying for, he added a 5th rak'ah and then made the sajda of the 5th rak'ah, his obligatory fard prayer is invalidated and becomes a voluntary prayer. He then adds another rak'ah such that the extra 2 rak'ahs constitute an additional voluntary prayer for him, and then performs the prostration of forgetfulness. So somebody's praying the 4 fard of Zuhr, the person stands up for the 5th rak'ah and makes the sajda of the 5th rak'ah. What should they do? Add on a 6th rak'ah. At the end of the 6th rak'ah, the person should make the 2 sajdas of forgetfulness, and all 6 rak'at will become nafil. And thereafter, the person would have to repeat their Zuhr, 4 fard of Zuhr altogether. If one needed to perform the prostration of forgetfulness but rather said the closing salams, after which another person thinking him to be in prayer joined him as a follower, then the follower's joining will be valid only if he, the original person praying, continues his prayer and performs the forgetfulness prostration. Okay, what does this mean? A person has prayed their 4 fard of Zuhr and then given salam, assalamu alaikum. And then after giving salam, that person is still sitting with their hands on their thighs, facing towards the qibla. And then somebody walks into the masjid and thinks this person's still praying. So the person comes and joins Allahu Akbar and sits down beside that person. That person then remembers, I've still got 2 sajdas of forgetfulness. So the person says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Allahu Akbar, and goes into sajda. If that original person makes the 2 sajdas of forgetfulness, the one who has joined him, his prayer will then also be valid. Otherwise, his prayer will be invalid if the original person does not make the 2 sajdas of forgetfulness. If one does not frequently have doubts in the prayer, then a doubt in the prayer would invalidate it. So if somebody doesn't always have doubts, and then suddenly the person has a random doubt, then that will invalidate the prayer, and the person should repeat their prayer from the beginning. Whereas if somebody constantly has doubts, then they should base their so a person has doubt, how many rak'at have I prayed, should always base a person's decision on the smallest number which comes to their mind. If, however, it is frequent, he should make a reasonable estimation, tahari, and adhere to it. Otherwise, he should assume the lower number and sit after every rak'ah that could possibly be the last one. So a person thinks, have I prayed 3 rak'at or 4? He can't decide. So he should take the 3 number. And then after every rak'ah, he should sit. Why? Because the last sitting is from the integrals of the prayer. It's from the arkan of the prayer. If he misses that, then the prayer will be invalid. So he should sit after every rak'ah and then at the end make the 2 sajdas of forgetfulness. Okay, what if you have forgotten to say the at-tahiyyat and make the 2 sajdas for forgetfulness? The namaz will be nafaz, or you have to repeat? Good question. So if somebody is sitting in at-tahiyyat, but they didn't recite at-tahiyyat, as long as they sat for it and then they made the 2 sajdas of forgetfulness, their prayer will still be valid. It will be valid, but they would have missed out on the recitation of the at-tahiyyat, which doesn't totally invalidate the prayer. Does anybody have any questions on that part? Okay, so how can we prevent ourselves from becoming forgetful in the prayer? Not so frequent. So if somebody forgets, but not so frequently, that's something which can happen to anybody. Whereas if somebody constantly forgets within the prayer, then they are going to have to focus a bit more on their wudu. The scholars have said one of the reasons of inattentiveness within the prayer is inattentiveness whilst performing wudu, right? Whilst performing wudu. And that's number one. And number two, that a person should also try to cut down on their food consumption. One of the major reasons why people forget in the prayer, or why people have a lot of waswasas in the prayer, is because their stomachs are too filled with food. So, and this is from the benefits of hunger. What about when you go for the next stand-up and you almost forget to say the tahiyyat? Yes, so that has passed. So if somebody is praying a 4 rak'ah prayer, after 2 rak'at, one is supposed to sit. Instead of sitting, a person stands up for the 3rd rak'ah. As long as the person has not made the sajda for the 3rd rak'ah, they should return to the sitting position and recite the tahiyyat. Can a person perform the sajda of forgetfulness while making up a missed prayer? Of course, right? So if in a missed prayer, in a qada prayer, somebody misses a wajib, they can also add on to it the sajda of forgetfulness. The prostration of recital. The prostration, sajdatul tilawah, the prostration of recital is mandatory wajib, yet it can be delayed unless the verse is recited in the prayer. So if the verse is recited in the prayer, then the sajda should also be made in the prayer. Whereas if it's recited outside of the prayer, then the sajda can be performed outside of the prayer. Its legal cause is recitation of any one of the 14 specific verses that are found in the following surahs: Al-A'raf, Al-Ra'd, Al-Nahl, Al-Isra, Maryam, Al-Hajj, Al-Furqan, Al-Naml, السجدة صاد فصلت النجم الانشقاق اقرأ باسمي. However, hearing the verse is a condition for the prostration to be mandatory, even if it were recited in a language other than Arabic, if the listener understood its meaning. So, if any one of these 14 verses is recited by somebody or heard by somebody in Arabic, then they must make the sajda of tilawa. Whereas if it's heard by somebody in a language other than Arabic, then the condition of making the sajda is that the person uh, understands its meaning. So what does that mean? Understands its meaning. So the person, through the English translation, for example, realizes that this is from the verses of sajda, then they should make sajda. But if the person doesn't realize, then it's not mandatory upon them. It can be fulfilled by an extra bowing or an extra prostration in the prayer, if the verse is recited in that prayer. The normal bowing of the prayer can also suffice, yet only if one intends the prostration of recital thereby, while the normal prostration of the prayer will suffice even if not accompanied by such an intention, as long as it, i.e., the normal bowing of the normal prostration, is performed immediately after its recital. Okay, now this part is something which is not commonly known by the people, and that is, if somebody is praying and inside their prayer they recite one of the 14 verses of sajda, what do we generally do? Once we've recited that verse of sajda, we say Allahu Akbar and go into the sajda position. This is what we normally do. But the Shaykh is saying what you can also do is, at the end of that verse, once you finish that verse, and then you want to make the prostration of tilawa, instead of going into sajda, you can go into the ruku position. Say Allahu Akbar and go into the ruku position and say Subhana Rabbiyal Azim 3 times, and then come back and carry on with your recitation. This is number 2. Number 3, what can be done is, once the person has made the recitation of one of the 14 verses, then that person goes into the ruku position, the normal ruku position. But in that normal ruku position, the person also intends that I'm making the sajda of tilawa in this ruku also. That's also valid. Now, these second and third options are very rare. People don't do them. What generally people do is, when they have a sajda of tilawa, they go into sajda position and make the sajda of tilawa, and then come back and carry on with their recitation, and then carry on with the prayer normally. But what can also be done is the bowing. An extra bowing can be done for it, or an extra sajda. Extra sajda we know, but extra bowing is something very rare. And then the actual bowing of the prayer itself can also suffice, as long as a person made the intention of sajdatul tilawa within it. So that bowing can combine the normal bowing of the prayer plus the sajda of tilawa within it. Joining the congregation in a rak'ah in which the imam had recited a verse of prostration and had already prostrated for it is effectively like joining him in it, i.e., the prostration. Otherwise, he must perform his own prostration if he heard it from the imam. So if somebody joins the prayer and the imam has already in the previous rak'ah made the sajda of tilawa, it's done. Whereas if Okay. Whereas if so, the person comes to the masjid and outside, before he enters into the prayer, he hears the imam reciting the verse of sajda, and then he attends, and then the imam makes a sajda, and then the person joins that same rak'ah, right? It's as if the person has made the sajda with the imam. So a person enters the masjid, he hears from the speakers the imam is reciting the verse of sajda, and the imam has made the prostration of sajda, then this person comes and joins that particular rak'ah. He doesn't have to then repeat a sajda of tilawa because effectively it's done for him. Whereas if the person hears the imam recite the sajda of tilawa, and then they go to make wudu, and then they come and join the congregational prayer, but not in the same rak'ah as not in the same rak'ah in which the imam recited the sajda of tilawa, then after the prayer, the person would have to make up that sajda of tilawa themselves. Why? Because they missed that rak'ah in which the imam made the sajda. One prostration suffices for the recital of a verse of prostration multiple times if that verse is repeated in the same sitting. So somebody who's trying to memorize the Quran and they pass by a verse of sajda and they repeat it 10 times, 20 times, they only have to make one sajda as long as they are in that same setting whilst they are reciting that verse. If they move away from that setting to another setting, then they would have to repeat the sajda however many times they move in different settings. But if the person is one room reciting away, even if they recite 1,000 times, they only make one sajda. If a verse of prostration is recited before the prayer, then one's prostration for it within the prayer suffices. The opposite, however, does not hold. So somebody who's reciting the Quran before the prayer, and then they pass by a verse of sajda, but they didn't make the sajda. In salah, they made an intention that my prostration, my normal prostration of salah, I'm also combining the sajda of tilawah with this. That's enough. But the other way around doesn't work. And what's the other way around? That if somebody recites the verse of tilawah inside the prayer, they must make the sajda inside the prayer. They can't make it outside the prayer. It is recommended for one to recite it silently if someone else is present and not paying attention. So if somebody is reciting the Quran out loud and there's other people around, but they're not listening to that person's recitation, when the person reaches the verse of tilawah, should recite it silently so as to not make sajda wajib upon a people who are not listening into one's recitation. It is recommended for one to stand before performing its prostration. Or it's recommended. So whereas if somebody is sitting and they go into sajda, that's also fine. There's no raising of hands. Literally, it's Allahu Akbar and into sajda. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la 3 times, and then Allahu Akbar and out of the sajda. There's no raising of the hands at the beginning, and there's no tying of the hands, and there's no salam at the end. It's literally a sajda. Could you repeat it again? Sorry, could we repeat which part again? Is it the way how to perform the sajda? How to perform the sajda is it's recommended to stand up. When somebody stands up, the Quran part. Okay. So if somebody recites, if somebody is reciting Quran in the masjid at home, and making tilawat in the masjid or at home, and there's other people around, but those other people, they are not actually sitting in that person's gathering, listening attentively to that person's recitation, it's recommended for that person to carry on reciting out aloud, except when passing by the verse of sajda, one should recite it in a low volume, so that the sajda doesn't become mandatory wajib upon those other people who are not actually attentively listening into his recitation. Is that clear? All the conditions of the prayer are stipulated for the validity of the prostration of recital, except the opening tahrima. So which conditions? A person be in a state of wudu, a person's clothes, body, place of prayer be all pure. The only thing that's missing is you don't have to say the Allahu Akbar tahrima to enter into it. It is performed in the following manner. One prostrates once between two takbirs. Allahu Akbar and down into sajda. Allahu Akbar and out to sajda. Both of which are sunnah. One does not raise the hands, recite tashahhud, or say the closing salam. Nothing. Just literally a sajda. Does anybody have any questions on that section? The prostration of gratitude. There is difference of opinion as to whether the prostration of gratitude is legislated, i.e. recommended without being disliked or disliked. If one desires to express gratitude, he should pray 2 rak'ahs out of gratitude to Allah, glorious and exalted. So there's a difference of opinion between Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu and his 2 students. Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu said, there is no such thing as the sajda of shukr. Whereas he said, if somebody wants to show gratitude and thankfulness unto Allah, one should pray 2 rak'at of nafil. You know, like what we see the footballers, some of the Muslim footballers do when they score a goal, they go into the sajda position, right? That's called the sajda to shukr, the sajda of gratitude. Some scholars have said that's fine. Other scholars have said, to show gratitude, one must pray 2 entire units of prayer, rather than just to perform a single sajda. An important note regarding a method of warding off every harm and stress. Imam Nasafi and others have stated, if one recites all 14 verses of prostration in one sitting and performs a separate prostration for each verse, then Allah Most High will take care of all his worries in both this life and the next. So here, Imam al-Nasafi, one of the great Hanafi scholars, said, there are 14 verses in the Quran which are known as the verses of sajda. If somebody has some worries, some troubles, some difficulties, some hardships, or wants something to be fulfilled, wants something to be attained, then he said, the scholars have tried and tested this for a person to sit in one place in the state of wudu and to recite all 14 verses of sajda one after the other. And then at the end of the recitation to make 14 sajdas and then pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the fulfillment of that particular matter, for the lifting of that calamity or difficulty. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fulfill that person's prayer and dua. So this is something good that people should try to practice whenever they are in difficulty and hardship. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these particular verses of Sajdatul Tilawa. Could we read all namaz loudly? We can recite only Fatiha and a surah out loud in the those obligatory prayers in which the Imam recites out loud. So if we are praying Maghrib alone, Isha alone, or Fajr alone, we can recite Fatiha and Surah out loud. So whatever the Imam recites out loud and whichever prayers the Imam recites out loud in, if we are praying those prayers alone, we can also recite loud. Other than that, the remainder of the prayer should be recited silently. Is that clear? Okay, we'll stop there for a few moments to pray Salatul Asr, and then we'll carry on with the Aqidah section, inshallah.